দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ আর টিভির নতুন আলোচনা অনুষ্ঠান ফোর্থ রাইটে আপনাদের সঙ্গে আছে আমি সৈয়দ আশিক রহমান। এই অনুষ্ঠানে আমরা কথা বলি বিভিন্ন সেক্টরের বিশেষজ্ঞদের সাথে, যারা তাদের বিভিন্ন অভিজ্ঞতা কাজের উদ্দেশ্য নিয়ে আলোচনা করেন। আমাদের আজকের অতিথি বাংলাদেশে নিযুক্ত জাতিসংঘের মহিলা বিষয়ক সংস্থা ইউএন ওমেনের বাংলাদেশের প্রতিনিধি ক্রিস্টিন হান্টার। Very welcome, Christine Hunter, at our TV studio. How are you doing today? How are you today?
I'm well, and really it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great, great. Well, how long have you been in Bangladesh?
I've been here now 2 years.
How do you find it here?
I've really enjoyed it. It's such a dynamic country. I love the cultural diversity, all the investment in culture, and how welcoming people are. It's really a privilege to be here.
When did UN Women you start?
Actually, our predecessor, UNIFEM, started in Bangladesh in 2006. And in 2010, the UN General Assembly created UN Women and launched in 2011. So we've been UN Women here in Bangladesh since 2011.
Please tell us on role of UN Women in Bangladesh and global.
Certainly. As you know, in Bangladesh, the government has made many commitments to gender equality. And in fact, you could say the entire foundation of the country of Bangladesh was based on support for equality among all the different people in the country. So UN Women's job is to support government to implement those commitments that they've made on gender equality, and also to work with civil society so that they can have a strong voice in shaping the kind of equality that women and men want in Bangladesh.
When did UN Women start its work in Bangladesh?
Well, our predecessor, UNIFEM, started here in 2006, but then the General Assembly at the United Nations created UN Women from UNIFEM and other agencies in 2010.
Well,
So as of 2011, UN Women has been a full office in Bangladesh.
so what is the achievement last 10 years?
I can speak more to the achievements since UN Women's been here. One of the big changes we've seen, actually looking back to 2006, is how much stronger the partnerships between UNIFEM or UN Women and the government have become.
Well,
And through those partnerships, we've supported the National Women Development Policy, supported the government to convert that into an action plan,
well,
to encourage line ministries to actually take those actions into their budgets and
Line
plans.
ministry.
Yeah. UNIFEM and UN Women and others also supported the government to see how they could integrate gender equality into the budgeting process. And
budgeting process.
yeah, and we call it gender responsive budgeting.
Well,
UN Women's also done a lot of work with women migrant workers, to women who migrate,
who migrate?
for labor.
Women migrate workers.
Yeah, women migrant workers, to help strengthen the policy protection for all
Policy
migrant
protection.
workers,
Yes.
but also to really develop systems to support women migrants before they migrate, to support them when they return so they get the most benefit from their experience. And also to support really the government in getting those systems in place for ethical recruitment, things like that. Recently, some of our very interesting work has been in the context of climate change.
Climate change.
Yeah, we've done some really interesting work with partners to understand how climate change is related to gender
Related to the gender
equality.
equality.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And therefore, what should we do differently as we support communities to adapt to the changing environment? So I think we're getting some really strong results there in partnership with the Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, who's doing some great research, with partnership with BRAC, where we're really working on what kind of livelihoods help build women's resilience to climate change.
Well, resilience.
Yeah, which is really the ability to adjust and cope with shocks. You know, when the environment changes, can you make the adjustments so that you can continue to have a decent life. So really building women's resilience, also by removing discrimination. And then some really interesting work with the government to strengthen government ability to look at gender and climate change as they develop policies and plans.
Gender and climate change to make the policy plan.
Yes. So, for example, right now there's a lot of work going on, National Disaster Management Plan.
Well,
So how can the government be aware in developing that plan of what the gender inequalities are?
well,
And then in having a plan to manage disasters, manage them in a way that will reach and protect women equally with men. So that's one example.
as far we know, you work women's involvement in decision making. What do you say on this issue compared to Bangladesh situation in nowadays?
Well, certainly Bangladesh is well recognized for having very senior positions filled by very capable women.
Well,
So the Honorable Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition in the House, the leader of the other largest party, the Speaker of Parliament, ministers. So on that side, Bangladesh does very well against most countries in the world. In terms of women in political decision-making more broadly, 20% of women in parliament. So that's less than what the government would like to see, which is the government has set a target of 1/3.
well,
And certainly women's rights activists would like to see at least 1/3. So we've got some ways to go there. The Representation of People's Order, which sets a target for every political party to have at least 1/3 of women at every level, including as candidates.
well,
That's a great target. We're hoping to see much more action
action.
by the parties and by the government and by the Elections Commission to now implement that really great law.
Well, great finding. Violence and repression against women is a global phenomenon. What is your opinion on this?
Globally, the figure that is used is that 1 out of every 3 women anywhere in the world has experienced violence. I think the real numbers would be higher than that. Bangladesh has actually taken a very, I think, courageous step in having a national survey.
Well,
So Bangladesh has now very comprehensive statistics. And what they show us is that 87%.
87%.
Yes, 87.
Remarkable number.
And that's the percentage of women who have ever been married and have experienced some form of violence. Now, that could include emotional violence, physical, sexual, economic. If we look just at physical violence, which is maybe a little bit better understood,
Well,
it's still 2 out of every 3 women in Bangladesh
2 out of 3.
who've experienced physical violence from their spouse.
Well, how do we reduce this number?
I think there's one overall change we need to make. And
Overall changes.
yeah, my proposal is that there's one that's very big, and that's that we have to change how women are valued.
How women are valued.
Yeah, because you can't have so many women as targets of violence if they were valued equally with men. It would be impossible. So we have to change how women are seen.
It should come from the family. It should come from the education, from the society.
Absolutely in the family. One thing we know is that if children grow up watching their father abuse their mother, they're more likely to repeat the pattern. So boys are more likely to be violent and girls are more likely to accept it. So absolutely, if we change in the family, that makes a big difference. But how is that going to happen if women aren't considered equal? So if we look in law,
Well,
18 is the age of majority, right? So
Exactly.
before 18, you can't give consent.
exactly.
But 1/2 of the girls who are aged 15 to 19 are married. So their consent didn't matter.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
What is your advice?
We need all the laws in Bangladesh to support the objectives set out in the National Women Development Policy.
Men and women should be equal.
I mean, Bangladesh actually, in most ways, has a good legal framework. So there's from the constitution that recognizes equality down through laws that are supposed to address violence, like Domestic Violence Act.
Domestic violence,
Yeah. And a lot of other laws that are put in place to try and address or criminalize human rights abuses against women and girls. But on the other hand, we have other laws that say women are less than men. So those laws need to be reformed to remove the discriminatory provisions.
Those laws.
And the other laws need to be implemented.
What do you think on gender inequality in Bangladesh and other developing country if you compare it?
Certainly, Bangladesh has made more progress in gender equality than many countries, and certainly more than most other parts of South Asia. So we know about the increased enrollment of girls in school, not only primary, but also secondary, which is really important, and very significant reduction in women dying because of childbirth. So those have been huge accomplishments, as well as general poverty reduction. But what Bangladesh shares with other countries is the need to really address some of the remaining issues, such as violence against women, child marriage, women's exclusion from some levels of decision making. And in Bangladesh, one of the places where Bangladesh lags a bit behind is in terms of women's participation in the labor force, in the economy.
In economy, like if you elaborate it.
Yeah, so in Bangladesh, women, only less than 40% of women actually participate in the labor force, compared to more than 80% of men. The country has invested in education for girls. So even though girls aren't finishing secondary school always, it's much, much better than it was 20 years ago. But those women come out of school and it's very hard for them to get decent work. So now it's time to invest in giving economic opportunities to those women.
We'll talk on some other issues, including He for She project after a short break. দর্শক দেখছেন আর টিভির নতুন আলোচনা অনুষ্ঠান ফোর্থ রাইট। এই পর্যায়ে নিচ্ছি ছোট্ট বিরতি, ফিরছি একটু পরে। সে পর্যন্ত আমাদের সাথে থাকুন। দর্শক আবারও আমন্ত্রণ ফোর্থ রাইট অনুষ্ঠানে। আজকে কথা বলছিলাম বাংলাদেশে নিযুক্ত জাতিসংঘের মহিলা বিষয়ক সংস্থা ইউএন ওমেনের প্রতিনিধি ক্রিস্টিন হান্টারের সঙ্গে। Welcome again, Christine, at our TV studio. Before our break, you are talking on economic opportunity for women. Would you please tell more about it?
Absolutely. So if we want women to participate more in the economy, and everyone knows that that's going to be good for the country, it's going to be good for households. I mean, as you said before the break, you were talking about the ready-made garment industry, and that's been one of the developments that propelled Bangladesh forward economically, and that's been women in that as a workforce. So if we can get more women working, it not only supports those women and their opportunities in life, but it also allows them to contribute to the national economy. But to do that, we need to do a couple of things. And one is we need to talk about the amount of unpaid work that women are doing. Now, some of that unpaid work is as laborers in the family, and it produces food that goes to the market or goods that are sold in market. So it directly contributes to the economy and to profits, but women aren't getting paid.
I think there will be changes for economical development for women.
Yeah, absolutely. It would change a lot of things.
Very recent, a new project has launched named He for She. Would you please describe on it?
I would be very happy to do that. He for She is a solidarity campaign.
Solidarity campaign.
Solidarity. Men standing up, not just for women, but for women's rights.
Women's right.
And in fact,
নারী পুরুষের সমতা, পুরুষের সহায়তা। he for she.
So this is a campaign where we're really encouraging men across the country to stand up and say, I want to commit to promoting gender equality. I want to commit to working alongside women to achieve rights.
Great.
And we're encouraging men to make a really tangible commitment so that we can all follow up. The government has made commitments to take gender equality forward in the 7th five-year plan, and we would love to support the implementation of that.
Right.
We are working with that.
Right.
But I would encourage everyone watching to think about
it's a good
joining.
initiative. Do you have any specific agenda on this issue?
We have an agenda. We've been working on this with the ambassador of Sweden, who really wanted to see this grow into a big campaign. Ambassador Frizzell, who's a man who's leading on the he for she.
Exactly.
So we have together an agenda to see how many men in Bangladesh we can encourage to stand up, to make good quality commitments, and to join with us in following through. So that's how we're going to measure our success. Now, I could say in the last 2 days, more than 100.
More than 100
men have joined in Bangladesh.
Great.
Now, it may even be much more. That was the number very early this morning, more than 100.
Well.
So we're thinking that could, maybe if we talk this time next week, maybe that could be more than 1,000. Who knows?
Yes, we hope so. We hope
Yes.
so. How we may relate women with climate migration society, what role they should play?
We've done some really interesting research with BCAS to look at what are the gender equality sides of migration. Certainly what we're seeing is very large numbers, mostly of men, are migrating from poor communities. Changes in the climate are affecting their livelihoods. And they're migrating often to nearby urban centers, sometimes just for the worst 1 or 2 seasons. One of the results is that you find some villages in these areas affected by climate change that are almost only women. Well. So women are doing everything. They're actually picking up the livelihoods in the village. So they're picking up the agriculture or the fishing. They're running the households. They're keeping the community running. And they're often trying to take on other livelihoods because they need other money. Well, the men are off trying to work in urban settings. So there's a couple of effects. On the difficult side, we see the work burden for women is unbelievable. There's truly not enough hours in the day to do what they're trying to do. On the other side, we see that women are sometimes getting the opportunity to step more into leadership roles that men might have been occupying, but since men are often the urban center earning there, women are taking that leadership in the community and in their households. And some women are finding that they're taking on work that's usually done only by men, such as fishing.
Well.
And they're enjoying that freedom and being able to show how good they are at doing different kinds of work. So it's a complicated issue to know how to best support communities where migration might be a good option for the men, but then how do we support the women? It's a bit complicated. But I think Bangladesh can actually be leading some of the global discussions on this because we're generating research. We're not just UN Women, also other partners. And having these discussions like here, I mean, you wouldn't find this discussion on a talk show in most countries. They're not even thinking about it. So I think Bangladesh can be leading. Even
women's major challenges in present.
We've been talking about the challenges on the work because we work for gender equality and empowerment of women, challenges to gender equality are also our challenges. Countries still are not committing resources to take forward gender equality. So women's rights organizations have very insecure funding often. It's easier to get funding to work on poverty or climate change, harder to get money to work on gender equality. but we can't end poverty or have sustainable development without gender equality. But that's what doesn't get funded nearly as much. And I think if you look at the funding in Bangladesh, you would see it's very true here as well.
We are almost end of the program. Any final thoughts for our viewers to share?
Well, I'm very encouraged by the way that RTV actually looks in depth into these issues, and I would just really encourage you to keep looking at these issues, keep talking about them, and your audience to have these conversations in your households, in the streets, in your workplace. 20 years ago, we all signed on to put gender equality at the heart of development.
Right.
We've made some progress.
Great.
But one of the slogans is, we're not there yet.
We'll keep your message to tell to everyone, he for she. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anik Dhanabad.
Thank you very much. দর্শক, একটি সমাজের অর্থনৈতিক উন্নয়নে নারীদের ভূমিকা অনস্বীকার্য। সময়ের সাথে সাথে সমাজের প্রতিটি ক্ষেত্রে নারীদের অংশগ্রহণ বেড়েছে উল্লেখযোগ্য হারে। জাতীয় পর্যায়ে আমাদের নারীরা যেমন অবদান রেখে চলেছে, তেমনি আন্তর্জাতিক পরিমণ্ডলেও তাদের উপস্থিতি আমাদেরকে আরও বেশি অনুপ্রাণিত করে। আমরা আশা করি জাতিসংঘের মহিলা বিষয়ক সংস্থা UN ওমেনের মতো অন্যান্য সংগঠনগুলো আরও সক্রিয়ভাবে এগিয়ে আসবে নারীদের অধিকার রক্ষায়। এই প্রত্যাশা শেষ করছি ফোর্থ রাইট। এত করে আমাদের সাথে থাকার জন্য ধন্যবাদ।